what will be the state of this economy with the amazing amount of data that we've seen, this turn more recently, or interest rate cut expected next month? What will be the state of the economy when the next president takes office?
I think the state will be pretty good. We have seen this really historic and robust economic recovery, as the president talked about last night. Coming out of the pandemic, we saw the unemployment rate come down. We've seen jobs be added month after month, almost 16 million jobs added since the president and the vice president took office. We have seen 3 years of record small business startups across America. We've seen record numbers of Hispanic and Black-owned businesses started up. We've actually seen wages now rising for 17 months for production and non-supervisory workers, the 80% of the workforce that are not managers or not professionals in the economy. So they are going to, whoever the president will inherit an economy that is really at that cruising altitude. We keep talking about a soft landing, but this economy just keeps humming along and has been quite robust. At the same time, one of the really important things will be that because of the president's Invest in America agenda, we've seen investments all across the economy that are starting to take fruit. We've seen historic amounts of investment in the construction of new manufacturing facilities all across the country. That's been going on for 6 quarters now at a historic level, and that is taking shape in communities all across the country. I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of communities over the past year and a half, and seeing where jobs are being created and what those economies look like. That kind of bringing communities along, that is what this next president, the kind of economy that they're going to inherit.
Well, that's the economy they inherit. Then it becomes a question of the kind of economy they could potentially create with their policies. We've heard outlines now, at least broad strokes, from both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, both of which, different components, have been criticized by some economists, including the likes of Jason Furman, who I'm sure you're familiar with, Heather, as potentially being inflationary, either because they're going to add to the deficit and that could cause it, or because they could spur more demand. Is that a fair criticism of both Donald Trump and Harris's outlines here?
Well, I think that what is very clear is that what little economic policies the Trump administration has put forward really do seem targeted at giving money back to the wealthiest and increasing expenses for the middle class. I mean, you look at the Project 2025, and there's a lot of concerns about what happens to Medicare, to Social Security. You look at his proposals on taxes, and they're not going to be good for the middle class. And outside modelers have forecast that it could likely lead to a recession. And then you look at the kinds of proposals that Vice President Harris has put forward, and she's focused on making sure that the kinds of costs facing families, that we can do more, that she can do more to bring those down.
And it is going after price gouging corporations, this vague idea, really a way to do that? Because Donald Trump is criticizing that as communist.
Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of states that actually have laws against price gouging. I mean, including the state of Texas. And in fact, what the vice president has put forward is to make sure that, corporations that are acting in bad faith are held accountable, and they can't overcharge consumers. And in fact, her proposal looks very similar to what Republicans in the Senate have proposed in a variety of industries. So this is about, making sure that markets are fair and competitive, and they are working for working people and consumers all across the country.
Well, the reaction from the food industry was pretty remarkable, pretty stern, following her proposal for a federal ban on price gouging. The National Grocers Association says, quote, "The proposal calling for a ban on grocery price gouging is a solution in search of a problem," saying that their members are also being impacted by inflation, victims of inflation. Is there not some truth to that?
Well, I mean, let's start with the facts, right? We know that over the past year, grocery prices have actually come down, right? They're now just 1.1% over the past year, and that's down from a high of over 13% in 2022, in the summer of 2022. So there has been, an easing of inflation in grocery prices, and that's certainly a good thing. But we also know that groceries and grocery stores have been highly concentrated in recent decades, and making sure that those markets work, that they are fair and competitive, that is an important piece of the puzzle. And let's remember, we've all lived through this historic pandemic, right? And one of the things that we learned from that is that policymakers have to pay attention to what's happening in supply chains. And sometimes things get out of whack. And so making sure that companies are not engaging in bad faith actions, that they are not engaging in price gouging. Again, that's something that states have long had laws on, and it's something that she's making sure that she could do at the federal level.
As you talk here about supply, we of course hear frequently from the Fed that there's not much they can do about that. What they can impact through interest rate mechanisms and the like is demand, and they're trying to get that into better balance. Given everything you just said about how costs have come down at the grocery store and in other places, the conversation that everyone is having on Wall Street is the time is now. Demand and supply are in balance. It's time to cut rates. So since you are here in your personal capacity, what is your personal opinion as an economist about what we're in for in terms of rate cuts in the next several months?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. We have seen that inflation has come back down, right? We have seen that we continue to see a labor market that is performing well for the American people. We continue to see jobs being added. However, there are signs of a little bit of things getting a little bit softer in the labor market. And certainly the Fed has a very important role to play there. But I do want to just really focus in on one thing you said about the difference between supply and demand. The Fed has a bucket of tools that they can use, and certainly they have their dual mandate to make sure that we keep unemployment low while also having price stability. But there is this really important role, and this way that we've seen over the past few years, this administration has been able to use the tools on the supply side to help get markets back in shape so that we could see those prices come down.
Well, you're typically bound from talking about the Fed because of this administration's stand on Fed independence. But I want to know how you feel about jawboning, because Donald Trump is doubling down on this idea that the president should be involved in setting monetary policy. And he told Bloomberg, I think it's fine for a president to talk. It doesn't mean they have to listen. And did tell us that he jawboned, to use his word, over interest rates with Chair Jay Powell. What's wrong with that?
So here's the thing. One of the things that we know is that having an independent Fed is really good for the economy. It's important that policymakers have that space to make those decisions, right? It's important that they are able to, to think about those long-term effects on the economy. I mean, we could talk for hours about the academic research that makes this case, not just here in the United States, but globally. And we've seen what happens when politicians get too involved in those decisions, and it's not good.